We're so delighted that you tuned in to be with us today as we talk about the latest Forrester Consulting study, a study of over 1,000 key decision makers around the globe talking about finance, sustainability, and risk. I'm your host, Mandi McReynolds, Chief Sustainability Officer at Workiva. And today I'm joined by Erik, one of our key executives, as we reflect on all that's happened around the world with global elections to COP29, and as we look ahead to what companies can do in 2025.
Thank you, Mandi, for having me. I'm the GM of EMEA and APAC at Workiva.
And you and I are coming fresh off of COP29.
Yes.
And it's really an interesting time as we conclude over 60 global elections happening around the world.
Yes.
To be a part of public policy and decision makers and stakeholder engagement. And so there isn't a better time to talk about what key decision makers are thinking in business. So this Forrester Consulting study looked at over 1,000 key decision makers that are involved in finance, ESG reporting processes, and the key findings really found that a key for solutions are to really think about assured integrated reporting. And Erik, I wonder, as you travel the globe, as you've been a part of these policies and key decision maker discussions, how do you define assured integrated reporting?
Well, assured integrated reporting starts with the word assurance. Integrated reporting combines financial and non-financial disclosure. But all that means nothing if you can't provide the trust to your stakeholders that that information that is being provided to them, disclosed to them, can be trusted. So assurance is a key tenet of all the disclosures that companies are providing to build that trust with all their stakeholders that what they're doing in creating value is going to be sustainable and resilient in the future.
I want to double click on a key word you said there, which is value.
Yes.
Value. And you and I were talking beforehand in the studio, and we were reflecting on these interesting findings of the study where 3 in 4 say effectively communicating their sustainability value is critical to investors for liquidity. And you had a very interesting conversation at COP with an economist talking about this notion of value. Would you mind sharing with those listening in on LinkedIn what that was like, and how does this really come to life for you, where 3 in 4 say this is critical for the future of their companies?
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to have been invited to a breakfast meeting with the heads of the largest investment banks in the world, insurance companies in the world, as well as some regulators, including some economists. And I was sitting next to an economist who said, and I loved the way he put it, he said, there's no sustainability without profitability. And what he means by that is that companies, as the private sector looks to bring in more sustainable practices, they have to do so while keeping in mind how they're going to continuously create value. Because sustainability requires a lot of capital investment. And that capital investment may have short-term result impact, right, implications. And as they are, especially for listed companies, they will be continuously under pressure from their shareholders to continuously increase their profitability. So that balance in bringing in sustainability while ensuring that the company continues to grow their profitability is really critical. So that communication of assured information on how they plan to balance that as they make investments in their operations, manufacturing, services, to ensure that they are continuously investing in sustainable practices, and that how those investments will actually ultimately create value is really, really important for their stakeholders.
Now, one of the second parts of this study talked about regulation is opening up opportunities for value beyond compliance. And I thought it was such a unique time to be at the global stage of COP and policy negotiations post all the global elections. And what we really heard, I was at a dinner with the World Economic Forum and Chief Sustainability Officer leaders and regulators and policymakers were there as well, reflecting on the negotiations and then looking ahead to to COP30, looking ahead to 2030, when we have these bold commitments as a society and how we need to transition as an economy to a low carbon economy. And the interesting push was both the private and public sectors are moving forward because it is of economics and of the importance to engage in a global economy to have a successful business. And so CSRD was brought up, where in this study we see 68% of respondents plan to adopt CSRD because they're seeing it as this gold standard. They're seeing it as a way forward. Now, your discussion on the main stage was fascinating because you have a CFO experience. You were formerly on Wall Street, and you talked about that journey of companies and your personal experience of looking at a company from a single dimension to now this multiple dimension, multiple view of how value is created and how CSRD plays into that.
Yes.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, decades ago when I started my career, value creation, this whole notion of creating value for corporations was single dimensional. It was focused on the interest of a single stakeholder, the shareholder. So it was very much understood that companies' singular goal was to create shareholder value. And how do you create shareholder value? Increasing the present value of your future free cash flows. And so what that did was it enabled some companies, it actually encouraged some companies to take shortcuts. They would borrow from the future to pay for today to increase their short-term cash flows, which increases their value, right? But that may have had impact on the future, on the environment, on their communities, and so on. Today's world, it's not so simple. It's now multidimensional, which is why at COP29 we're talking about how do these corporations and regulators work together cross-functionally to create a greener future. Because it's no longer, with the climate change impact in our daily lives, it's no longer something that we can ignore. And so this notion of multidimensional value creation means that we must invest in more than just shareholder value. We must invest in our communities, in our employees, in our customers. And that multidimensional investment actually creates sustainable value in the future. And this concept of sustainable value is really important because we all see it every day. The volatility in the macroeconomic environment, the volatility in the geopolitical environment seems to be increasing, which means that the environment in which businesses are operating is increasingly unpredictable. And when that happens, it is really important that we build operations in businesses that are resilient in the face of that volatility, which means that the notion of resilience comes from not just what the company does, but the support from its stakeholders. So when something happens, do your stakeholders support you or do they come against you, right? Yeah. This is the whole notion behind sustainable value creation.
So as we think about that idea of the volatility as companies move forward, trying to operate in a new economy, looking to the CSRD as kind of a global standard and a regulation that's moving us forward, particularly with double materiality,
yes,
looking at both the business and societal impact, we cannot just stop there. Because on Tech and Innovation Day at COP, as well as at Amplify, with both the Amplify in EMEA, the Amplify in APAC, the Amplify in the US, this statistic was so key. Existing technology is significant. We need it. We need better technology. 84% said they need tech improvements is so large. 9% say they expect the current tools to fully meet their needs in the next 18 months. And I think it's because we have this collide of both the economic value, the investor value, and then looking ahead to the regulatory compliance, there's sort of three stools in the next 18 months where people know they have to innovate now. And I'm curious, what are some of your reflections as you've had conversations from Amplify to COP around this notion of technology, around this notion of innovation?
Absolutely. You mentioned CSRD earlier. CSRD is a compliance requirement. But when I speak to C-level executives of the most successful companies, the most resilient companies, they're actually going beyond compliance. They're thinking beyond compliance to look at CSRD as an opportunity for their organizations to change, for them to invest in making sure that their company can create sustainable value in the future. What you need in doing that is technology. Why is technology important? Because in order for a company to transform their operations, they have to first understand their current state. That means that you have to, as a former CFO, I can tell you that you have to gather data across your entire operations. And for some of these companies, that's a really, really difficult task. They may have manufacturing plants all around the world with different standards of technology. Some may still be using very manual tools, some may be using very advanced tools. And so at the group level, you have to gather that information and be able to trust that information and be able to do that in an efficient and productive way so that you can first understand where are we today as an operation. And if we wanted to become a more sustainable company, to say become carbon neutral by a certain date, what do we need to do to get there? What investments do we need to make in our services, in our production, and so on? And that requires a lot of planning because there's ultimately going to be many pathways to achieve the same goal, some of which are realistic, some of which may not be realistic. And all the while continuing to operate the business in that time period, growing their bottom line and their top line. So this balance requires a lot of assured data so that their teams can actually do the analysis and come up with the right pathways and instill the right governance across their organization to make sure that by the time they report what their plans are to their stakeholders to create sustainable value, they can be confident that they have trusted data, they can be confident that they have the good governance across their operations to be able to achieve that outcome.
So as we conclude this session of LinkedIn, we are so thankful that you chose to tune in. But what's most important as we reflect on this past year is to look ahead to 2025. We've talked about trust. We've talked about accountable leadership. We've talked about the value creation. As you look ahead to 2025, which of those three areas are you going to be watching most closely?
I'm going to be watching most closely what companies do to invest in sustainable value creation. The companies that are really leading the way in thinking beyond shareholder value to broad stakeholder value. Because I'm already seeing evidence of companies that are doing that being much more resilient in the face of volatility. On the other hand, companies that are taking shortcuts, and we see many examples of that, being completely impacted and sunk by volatility. It can be, these days, I always say this to customers that in today's world, because of the advent of social media, every single employee, every single customer, every single member of their community is an amateur photojournalist, which means that instantly something in their operations somewhere around the world can instantly affect their reputation, and one single mistake can be amplified to something that can bring down the reputation of their entire company. So that means that that continuous awareness and investment in all their stakeholders so that in the face of that volatility, these companies, stakeholders will support them through that process is so critical. So that's what I'm going to be spending my time with companies paying attention to.
I love that. And well, thank you so much for joining us as we unpack this latest study from Forrester and reflect on what has been an incredible season to go from Amplify to Climate Week in the US to COP around the world. And then as we turn the corner and head into 2025, really looking at the true value creation of environment, social, and governance combined with risk and finance and continuing to build stakeholder trust along the way. Thanks so much, Erik.
Thank you, Mandi.